listening to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoy the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. My guest this week is Tom Tugendhat. It's a real privilege to have Tom on the show because he's the Conservative Member of Parliament for Tonbridge in the southeast of England. In the previous government, when obviously the Conservatives were in government, Tom was the Minister of Security for a time. He's also the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And he's also very publicly run twice to be the leader of the party as the succession planning was going on in the last government. Both those attempts were unsuccessful. He talks more about that and all of that really in the podcast itself. And he also talks about his broader background, which is fascinating as starting out as a journalist and then going into the army and then obviously leading on to what he does now in Parliament. And as you'd imagine, with a guy with that kind of pedigree, he's got an awful lot to say about leadership, an awful lot of great leadership tips, and it's a really, really interesting interview. So without further ado, let's go. Hey, Tom, fantastic to have you on the podcast. We've been a while trying to arrange this because you're an incredibly busy guy, but I'm extremely grateful for your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining.
Bob, it's great to see you again, actually. We've spoken a lot recently, but actually it's you haven't changed a bit. It's quite striking.
Well, that's a good thing.
I think so. But,
similarly, you're looking good despite your very busy life. Let's get us started. So I just want to kick off. I mean, you've had an incredible career journey. You've gone from journalism to the military, then to elected office. You're still an MP. You've been a minister in the last government. You survived the kind of what can only be described as a bit of an evisceration of the Tory party in the last election. And so you must be doing something right. You've been re-elected, which is congratulations to you. It's fantastic. But can you just give us a bit more, put some flesh on those bones, give us a bit of a summary of your career journey?
Well, I mean, we met, I think, when I was working for Field Marshal, the Lord Richards, as he now is.
Indeed.
Recently promoted by the King, when I was his MA. And I think we might have met before that in Afghanistan. I'm not quite sure whether...
Yeah, briefly, I think.
I think we probably did, actually. Yeah. But we worked together. Anyway, we worked together in the mod. But before then, I was a journalist, as you know. I started off, I read Islamic theology, funnily enough, at university, and so I had to learn Arabic to do that, and that's what took me to Yemen for the Arabic lessons, and then to Lebanon as a journalist. And really, because in those days, I know it's all different now, where everybody starts their own podcast or YouTubes or whatever, but in those days, in order to start in journalism, you worked on a local paper or you did something like that. And the way of sort of shortcutting it, as it were, was to work on a foreign local paper. So I worked for an organisation called the Daily Star, nothing to do with the UK Daily Star, an entirely separate organisation. No Freddie Starr eating hamsters or Elvis on the moon or anything like that. It was an English language Lebanese newspaper, which I think sadly has closed since, but was quite prominent in the region then. And it was great fun. And it was one of those things where I got the opportunity to try out, if you like, try out my Arabic in operational circumstances, but also learn to be a journalist. And I wasn't the best ever, but I was okay, and stayed out there and did a few things there. Then came back, thought it was a good idea to get a grown-up job, so I became a management consultant. That was a mistake. And so I ran away. I ran away to the army, basically.
I didn't know that. Who did you work with?
I worked with a group called First Consulting. They were a small outfit, and this is the late 90s. And so there was a lot of countries that were just joining the European Union, or rather had joined a few years earlier and had got a new sort of financial sector growing. So for the first time, for example, countries like Slovakia and Slovenia were introducing credit cards and pensions and things like that the state wasn't providing. And there was a sort of a small cottage industry of outfits like us who would go out and work out what the correct interest rate was for the company and how much money they should lend on whatever, So it it was very financial. And I left when one of the partners who I'd been working with said, "You're very good at this, but you'll be really brilliant when you develop the skills of an accountant." At which point, taxi, I'm out. Anyway, that was it. And
actually, it's funny you say that, because when I went for the Air Force to Deloitte, the amount of people that said to me, have you become an accountant? I went, no, I haven't become an accountant. I just,
exactly. I'm not saying financial probity doesn't matter. I mean, I've spent a lot of time looking at budgets and spreadsheets, as I'm sure you have.
Yeah, indeed.
But the idea that I needed to develop the skills of an accountant in order to further my career and down and that, no, that wasn't me. Anyway, so I ran off. Others ran off to sea. I ran off to the army. But it was a time when, you'll remember, in the late 90s, early noughties, when I thought that most of what we were going to be doing was sort of digging wells in Congo and sort of basically armored aid work. I mean, for want of a better expression. Then, of course, 9/11 changed all that, and that's when I went from being a reservist to being what was then called full-time reserve service. So I basically went full-time and stayed on and off with a couple of working for different government departments and agencies, working there for the next 10, 15 years until the MOD. And when General Richards retired as Chief of the Defence Staff, having done his time, I thought it was time to go and do something else, and that's when I stood for Parliament.
Nice. And the career's gone from strength to strength really since then. So I mean, I think, did you increase your majority at the last election? I can't remember.
No, but it didn't. We went from being the sort of in the top third of all seats to the top one or two of Conservative seats, and it's. I mean, the reality is, it's very easy to look at these numbers and pretend it's all down to you, and as you know, Bob, it ain't. I'm really lucky. I've built up an amazing team in Tonbridge who helps me serve the people of Tonbridge, and there's 5 people currently there. One who's been with me for 11 and a bit years, one who's been with me for 7, the other for 6. So a lot of continuity of people who really understand what the community needs, and it means that when we work as a team, we can get things done. I mean, there's a lot of my colleagues, as you can imagine, people in politics aren't paid a fortune, so a lot of people employ a lot of young people who are dedicated and interesting and clever and all the rest of it, but they stay for 6 months or a year or two, and because of that churn, you don't develop that same relationship with the community, or that ability to respond, or that understanding that, oh, well, we've seen this before. We saw it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or whatever. Here's the way to answer the question quickly and effectively. And because we've got continuity, and I've got a fantastic team of people in Tonbridge, it means we're able to serve the local community extremely well, I think extremely well. I mean, we're always trying to do better, but you know what I mean? I think we're okay. And that was reflected in the result, where, I mean, I think a lot of people, bluntly, let's be frank, didn't really want to vote Conservative, but they were happy with the service that they were getting, and the work that we were putting in as a team. Even as security minister, I spent a lot of time reading the inbox and visiting people and making sure, it's a bit like, the best equivalent I can give you is I used to spend at least a day or two a month with General Richards when he was Chief of the Defence Staff, visiting air stations and ships and docks and barracks and whatever else, just to understand what's going on, because that by the time something gets to you as a senior commander, or even as a junior commander, if you're an MP, it's probably been bubbling away for a while, and the only way to find it before it bubbles into being a problem is to actually go out and find out. And so, knocking on doors for me, or going and visiting a business or a school or whatever it happens to be, is about that sort of, pattern of life, building up a IPB or whatever you want to call it, right? It's making sure you understand what's going on in your area.
Yeah, but also it's an interesting challenge in politics. I mean, particularly when you're in government, or I suppose even in opposition, actually in shadow government, where you're holding a big portfolio doing something on the government benches if you're a minister or a cabinet minister, but at the same time, you're a constituency MP, and that must be quite a tension, because on the one hand, in the constituency, I'm sure that, you know, if you're the Prime Minister's constituency, for example, they're absolutely chuffed to have the Prime Minister as their MP, but at the same time, they probably recognise that, you know, the challenge of getting stuff done from a local MP point of view is a bit greater than if you're a backbench MP where you've clearly got more space to do that.
I mean, it goes both ways, of course, because if you're the Prime Minister or you're a minister or you're prominent for whatever reason, right, you're a shadow cabinet or cabinet, right, you have very often you've got greater weight, if you see what I mean. You've got a bigger platform, so when you say something, people listen. You know what I mean? So that's the advantage. The disadvantage is you have less time, quite obviously, which is why, I mean, for me, setting up the local team was so important because, I mean, you know, I'm not shy about it. I am ambitious. You know, I think ambition's a good thing, and I think people should be ambitious for their communities and their country. And if they think they can serve, they should be ambitious for the opportunity to serve at the, you know, the highest level that they can do it. But if you want that ambition to be credible, you need to make sure that were you to achieve it, you're not sacrificing those. You know, you haven't stepped on those below you, if you see what I mean, in order to get up. And there is a feeling sometimes with some you know, with some constituencies that MP, you know, that the constituency is just there to service their, you know, their ambition and to give them a platform for whatever it is they want to do. Now, I don't think that's right. And I'm very, very, very keen to make sure that that's not, you know, that couldn't be said. I mean, I'm sure some people will say it about me, but, you know, but it won't be said about me credibly because, you know, I think I'm really lucky to represent an extraordinary part of the United Kingdom. You know, I was brought up in East Kent, East Kent and London rather, but you know, I think it really matters, and I think that connection between people and their representative, that direct connection, I think is one of the great strengths of the British political system. Plenty of weaknesses of our political system, but that is a really big strength.
Yeah, no, that's a really good comment. I mean, I think interestingly, you mentioned it a second ago. One of my beliefs is, and I share your view, that MPs aren't paid very well. I personally think that's a mistake. I think if we want better politicians and people who are going to be, you know, less focused perhaps in some of the areas that have caused scandals over the years on all sides of the political divide, you know, then paying them better is an important thing to do, because I think it's obviously a you know, challenge. And I think the other thing, interestingly, I was listening to the audio book of Tony Blair's new book on leadership, which I thought was a very good book. And he's talking predominantly about political leadership, but he makes the point in there about his advice to people going into politics is do something else first. Because otherwise, you know, you become a kind of purely political animal, and so I think those two things are definitely a challenge in the political space. Don't know what your view is.
So, I mean, you know, I feel complaining about your pay is a bit like being in the military and complaining about your pay. You knew the deal before you signed up, right?
Sure.
I mean, and nobody's forcing you to do it. So I'm not sure how much of a difference it would make. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'd make more of a difference than I think. But I'm not sure how much of a difference it would make. I think the biggest challenges with politics aren't pay. It's the way in which the job needs to be done if it's going to be done properly, right? It is a full-on job, and you know, I have an unbelievably understanding wife and family. Because it really does. I mean, to say it eats into your weekend is you know, is the understatement of the century, right? I mean,
it must dominate your life. I mean, no question. It's particularly if you're in busy roles.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, even now when I've got a bit more time because I'm a backbencher again. You know, the family are off on holiday on Thursday because school's broken up. I've got various constituency events on Friday and Saturday, and on Sunday I know something will come up because it just always does. You know, now plenty of other people work hard during the week, and you know, so this is I'm sort of martyrdom plea. It just you know, I don't know a Saturday when I didn't work for 10-15 years now. Actually, that was also true of working for David Richards, by the way. You know, I worked every Saturday and Sunday too.
Absolutely.
So it's not that being an MP is unique. It's just, you know, it is a when I say it's a full-time job, I mean it's for probably most of us.
I think one of the bits that maybe is a bit more unique though, and I didn't mention it a second ago, but I think it's very relevant, is this whole, your private life becomes public property, and the level of, particularly in the world of social media, I mean, I think it affects beyond politics, but it's it's so intrusive, so damaging, potentially so hurtful to people. And and obviously we've seen it with threats against MPs, and and actually the risk, physical risk, and just emotional risk in terms of the amount of grief that sometimes you get, and that's got to make it challenging for lots of people, where they're feeling that is it really worth it? And I really admire you and everyone else that actually stands for public office, because I think it is. It's one of those things that, as you say, having served myself for 34 years in the Air Force, it's a great thing to do, but it comes with a price, and the military came with a price that you were away an awful lot, and that had a big impact on your life as well. But but in politics, I think it's really pronounced, some of that stuff, and it's must be difficult to deal with.
Well, I mean, you're right, it's intrusive. I'm not sure there's a good answer to it, because the reality is you're taking decisions on behalf of other people, and the British people have a right to know on what basis you're taking those decisions, right? And so knowing that you've got whatever it is, 2 kids, or that you worked for a think tank, or in my case, we're a journalist in the Middle East, or whatever, whatever it happens to be. I mean, you may not think they're relevant. Somebody else may think they are relevant, and that's how democracy works, right? I'm not, when I was an army officer, I was commissioned, appointed, through a process and a structure and all the rest of it. Now, the authority, for want of a better expression, or the responsibility, better word, I think, that I hold because people have chosen to give it to me, and they have to have the ability to choose to give it to me openly and publicly and all the rest of it. And part of the deal must be they must know the factors that go into it. And if it turns out, I was elected on one basis and I'm doing it under another, I think they have a right to, say no, or find out, or challenge, or whatever. And which is why, I'm always happy to do long form interviews like this. And in fact, it's one of the reasons I was very happy to do it with you. It's not only because we're all old friends, but because I like the ability to explain what I think, rather than the sort of 15-minute, well, not even actually 3-minute gotcha interviews that you get sometimes. But a lot of people don't like it, because you say things that you think. And a lot of people, I mean, a friend of mine who was the political editor of one of the major newspapers about 10 years ago said, I've found the perfect way to annoy politicians. I write down what they say and publish it. And they say, oh, well, I didn't mean that. It's, well, you did say it. And the same is true with these things. It's like, I think it is right that people know what I think about, whatever it is, welfare or tax or, defense or whatever it is, and they're able to make judgments off the basis.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I think I agree with you. I mean, as an avid listener to the Today and the PM programs on Radio 4, I see or listen often to lots of different politicians, all different colours, with some of those interviews. Sometimes the interviewers are very hostile and kind of difficult, but I do think sometimes some of your political colleagues don't do themselves any favors.
No, I agree.
By just basically refusing to answer the question, and that for your average listener is just, come on,
but it's. And you can see why they're doing it, right? And by the way, I'm not justifying it, but you can see why they're doing it. What they're doing is they are really nervous they're going to say something that they didn't mean to say. So they've walked in with a set of whatever it is, maybe 1, maybe 2 or 3 lines that they want to get out, and they're just going to say it again and again and again until the interview's over, right? And it's not going to last longer than, I don't know, 5 minutes or whatever. And so you end up in this bizarre situation where it's a non-conversation. And it is striking, though. I tell you, when I first started doing politics, whenever it was 10 years ago, in 2015, if I did the Today program, I would then get a bunch of phone calls, 1, 2, maybe even 3 text messages from people like you saying, oh, that was, oh, I thought you made sense there, or I didn't agree with you there, or whatever, whatever it happened to be. You get feedback from people. Now, when I do it, I get nothing, absolutely nothing. I
Wow,
wonder.
interesting.
I wonder what the listener figures are now. I mean, I don't listen to the Today program anymore. Um, I stopped in COVID, and it's a habit that you lose. I now listen to podcasts. I listen to, do you know what I mean? I listen to long form interviews. I listen to a lot of things, but and I listen to a lot of political shows as well. But I don't listen to the Today program or watch Question Time anymore. And I wonder how much that's, is it just me, or is that is that?
No, well, it's a very interesting point because I don't think it is just you. And one of the things I do, as you know, is I do quite a lot of work at Deloitte University, and
Yeah.
there are two or three of the UK-based facilitators who are all externals, are all like me. They're independent. They're working, as effectively as contractors, and I know two or three of them who are. And one of those particularly is very extreme about it. Says, I just don't listen to the news, full stop. And essentially, it's not because of politics. It's just because he finds it just too depressing too much of the time with the way the news is put over, and there's so little positivity about it. He'd rather just kind of enjoy his life and not focus on what's on that. I mean, that's complete anathema to me. I'm a bit of a news addict.
Well, so am I. So I do listen to the news. I just don't listen to it from that source, if you see
Yeah,
what.
yeah. But it is interesting because I think you're right. As a general comment, I think that some of these programs have damaged themselves a little bit in the way they've conducted themselves. I think that is entirely fair. Hey,
Well, they
let's
do that.
move on to something else if
Yeah, go on.
you're
Of
good to
course.
do that. I just want to because I'll come back to some of this stuff on wider politics and so on because I think there's some really interesting bits to do. But as you know, I think you listened to a few of my podcasts in the past. I mean, I tend to focus on the individual,
Yeah.
first, and then go into some of the general stuff later. We've kind of digressed a bit, which is
Sorry. Yeah.
my no, it's my fault. And it's fascinating the conversation, but. Go right back to the beginning. I mean, early motivations. What took you into that kind of journalism space and doing what what you then took you down the road beyond that?
So, I mean, I think I was always interested in journalism because it's understanding what's going on in foreign parts, and I've always been interested in foreign policy and what motivates people. I think that's why I studied theology, because theology, after all, it's not about God. Nobody knows anything about God. It's all about people. What do people believe? May be true, may not be true, but that's what it's about. And and so I as a at school, at university, I read a lot of history. I read a lot about the Middle East, and found it fascinating, and was always interested in what was going on in various elements of the various wars. And I don't know whether you were in it. No, you must be. You're too young. But the first Gulf War in '91.
No, I'm definitely not too young.
You, you,
I wasn't in it because I was on exchange with the German Air Force at the time, and of course the Germans had a
oh,
particular
they
view
wouldn't
about
go.
Gulf War One.
Yeah,
So
there was.
no, I watched with extreme interest and extreme disappointment, I must say, because at the end of the day, of course, if you train for years and years and
Yeah,
years to do this stuff, you don't want to be there when all your mates go off and do it and you're left behind. But
yeah.
no, I was definitely not too young. And the Falklands War was when I was in flying training. So
Oh, really? Oh, right.
oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, you're older than you look. Your highly lay works very well.
I have done my round, as they say, Tom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough. Well, look, I was in fact, I was asked by my predecessor as the MP for Tonbridge. And he said, "Oh, you were in the army." I said, "Yeah, yeah." He said, "What did you do in the Falklands War?" I said, "John, I was not even at school yet."
Well, actually, the thing these days, isn't it, is lots of people have never even heard of it. Where are
Yeah,
the Falklands? What was the Falklands War? I mean, it's become an artifact of history as opposed to anything else, which is, I mean, I guess it's not surprising, but
that was
it's
43 years ago. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's a long time.
yeah,
But
it's,
yeah, so look, I was always interested in that sort of thing, and I think like all of us, I sort of read the stories of adventure and daring do and all that sort of stuff that we grew up on. Big fan of Biggles in my day. Although I reread them the other day and decided that maybe my son didn't need to read them.
like a lot of things. Yeah, I think there's a few things have changed, aren't there, in terms of what
This is
we
one of
read.
those things where you go, yeah, maybe not, maybe not.
Yeah.
But it's but I read a lot of that sort of stuff, and always found it interesting, right? And so when the opportunity came up to go to Beirut, I took it, and you know I found it really rewarding, and so what can I say?
Yeah, no, it must be interesting. I'd be interested in your perspective actually about the journey of journalism over that time. I mean, if you look at, you started out doing that, looking at, I mean, obviously the technology and so on is way, way more sophisticated, and the timeliness of so on and so on is there. Social media is clearly a challenge and an opportunity in both ways, I guess. But it is very interesting to see how, just in my own working life, if I look at the difference in reporting of things generally, around stuff that I know a lot about versus stuff that therefore I don't know a lot about. And I'm kind of going, well, all right, so some of these things that come out that I do know a lot about, and I see the kind of misreporting that happens some of the time, that does make me worry a little bit that occasionally there are significant gaps probably in other areas as well. It would be naive to believe otherwise, wouldn't it? I mean, what do you think about that?
No, look, I think that's right. I mean, I think one of the interesting things is I mean, you mentioned pay for politicians, pay for journalists has changed a lot as well. I mean, there was a time when you were a foreign correspondent for a big newspaper, and they paid for your move, and they rented your flat, and they paid for the kids' education, and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it was before my time as a journalist, but you were traveling like you were a traveling diplomat or a traveling military officer or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It was a sort of package, and like businesses did it, and now everyone's a citizen journalist sort of thing. I mean, it's not quite, but it's not far off it. There's a few sort of big names, but you're basically doing it yourself. And so it was interesting, when I arrived at, I started in journalism just at the beginning of the internet. So the first newspaper websites were up, but they hadn't been up for very long. And I still had to read stories over the phone to the Times. So you'd have to, you'd spend about $50-$60 phoning up the Times in London and read, like, literally, today in Beirut, BEI, like that. You'd have to read it all the way through. And it was, take ages. And then we had the first email stories that you could email in because their systems were so sort of, they wouldn't integrate. And in those days, you could sell the same story, I mean, with minor changes, 4 or 5 times, to Asahi Shimbun or to the Times or to the Australian or Singapore Straits Times or whatever. So you could have, even as a whatever I was, 24-year-old, 25-year-old, you could have a pretty nice life selling one story 4 times, 5 times, 6 times every 2 weeks, and you were relatively well paid. Now, I'm not sure that'd be a living wage, frankly. I'm not sure you could afford to live off it. So that's changed the way that journalism works, and I think that's been a big change in engagement. But of course, everybody's got a camera phone, so that's also changed the way.
Yeah, and we know the perils of some of that, that's for sure. And I think it is interesting. The timeliness point is a very interesting one. I remember listening years ago to Kate Adie. She actually came to Coleshill when I was there flying the Jaguar, and we took her flying. And of course, the old joke in those days was you knew it was really serious when Kate Adie turned up. That was okay. We're now getting close to this. We're going to be a punch up. And she kind of reveled in that reputation a little bit. But she told a story about. It was the beginning of Kosovo, I think, where she'd been on board a ship that was, and I think it was an American ship actually, that was firing cruise missiles. And there was a guy from the New York Times who was there as well, who was they were all up on the deck of, with anti-flash gear and everything else to watch the launch of these missiles. And he took his pictures of the launch, immediately went below deck, did his piece, emailed it off back. And before the missile had hit its target, that picture and his story was already embedded in what was going to then become the copy of the paper rolling off, the next day. And her point to us from a military point of view was, you cannot beat those kind of timelines. You have to work with us to work with the way that's going to work. And I think that is really true. Yeah. And I think there's been an interesting, looking at it purely from a military media angle, there's been an interesting development over the years. If I think when I was in Afghanistan about casualty, management and things like that, to try and find a good way through making sure that we had enough time to do what we needed to do, but at the same time allowing the media to do its thing and do its reporting appropriately. And that has been a difficult trip to make it work, but it's got there eventually.
I mean, look, I agree with you, Bob, but I'd say it's not just the military. I mean, look at the difference between the IMF crisis in the 70s and the one and the bond crisis that hit Liz Truss. And, one of them lasted days, the other lasted hours, right? And that's because of this feedback loop. It's just the same. Or look at the way in which that poor bloke, actually, I don't feel that sorry for him, but the bloke at the Coldplay concert, the HR director, I mean, that went from being an incident at a concert to a global meme known by I don't know how many billion people in what, 24 hours, 48 hours? I mean, incredibly quick. And
that was because of smartphones. I mean, that was because a woman filmed it and TikToked it, and absolutely right.
Exactly right. And that business, which I don't know anything about the business that they were in. I think it's called Astronomer. I might have got that wrong. But anyway, I know nothing about that business, but that business has now got, two of its C-suite executives have gone. I think I may be wrong on that as well, actually, but at least one of them's gone. And, it's had both an enormous amount of publicity and an enormous amount of negative publicity. Now, the reality is that is the modern media environment, right? You and I think about it from a military or political angle because that's the worlds we're used to. But the truth is it's exactly the same in business. And the number of businesses who you see, the CFO does something, or one of your outstations in a country that you didn't even know about does something, and you are suddenly responsible for a global news story or even a national news story that could really affect your corporate reputation, your shareholder value, all these sort of things, is just huge and immediate. And so it's not just the military that has to think, how do I not only get ahead of the story in the sense of, when it breaks, but how do I think about how I'm going to deal with the story long before it's come up? Who is going to be the first person I call? Which are the organizations that I'm going to ask? What is the frank and open, you know what I mean? How blunt am I going to be? And consistently, the ones that do best, and I'm sure you've seen this too, are the ones that are as open and honest as possible, as early as possible, so that the first question the journalist asks is answered honestly with a straight answer, with as much detail as possible. And so, frankly, it runs out of steam quickly. It's when there's something new to discover. That's when it always gets worse and worse and worse, because it looks like a cover-up. Even if it's not a cover-up, it looks like a cover-up.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I can remember well when Dido Harding was the chief exec of TalkTalk, and they had their cyber crisis. And at that stage, I was doing crisis management in Deloitte. In fact, we bid for the work. That's when I first met Dido, actually. We were bidding and didn't win the work to do the crisis response for them. But one of the things she did was she was very upfront. She was very honest about it, and including saying what she didn't know and also what she thought people should be aware of. And of course, there were two really split this sort of divide on this, where some people said, "Oh, she was way too upfront with this. She should have kept it quieter for much longer and waited to see." And of course, the other side of it was, no, definitely not. And I'm firmly in the definitely not. I think she did exactly the right thing.
I completely agree.
And it is very interesting to see how different people behave in those kind of environments. And actually, one of the things I tend to say to a lot of people, when I'm doing training with them, particularly youngsters these days with social media, is say, look, be careful, because you might feel that you want to be a bit of a keyboard warrior on some of this stuff. This could come back to haunt you. Downstream, if you're, and particularly when I was a school governor at Christ Hospital, where obviously, it was an 11 to 18 school, so you've got lots of kids there who are very, very, internet savvy, complete internet natives, and saying, be aware of this, because everything you do never disappears. People can find it, they'll pull it back, and you make use of it again for you, and you've got to be careful. Because that can be quite damaging for you if you've got views that have you put out there in haste, that someone might then turn around and use against you downstream, because everyone looks you up and everyone does their research and their due diligence and all the rest of it, which is is one of the challenges, isn't it?
And I'm afraid on the internet, there's no right to be forgotten. Somebody has screenshotted, recorded, downloaded, backed up, whatever it is, the thing that you said. And, what's that thing that the police used to say or do say? Anything you say can
and maybe used against you.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't been arrested before, so I'll leave that to you, Bob. That's more of an Air Force thing.
Nor have I. I've watched enough police and crime dramas, Tom. Hey, switching back to you again and
Yes.
leadership styles. I mean, the podcast's obviously all about leadership. I'm really interested in the sort of transition of Tom Tugendhat over the years. You know, your adaptation of your leadership style, consciously, unconsciously, how you've shifted from all those different modes to where you are now. You know, what have you kind of learned along the way?
So I think, I mean, there are some elements that I think are universally applicable and others that are specific. So things that are universally applicable is, hire people you can trust and trust them. I mean, I think that's, that's a basic. And I spoke about the team who I work with in Tonbridge. And you'll hear, I mean, I'm very careful of saying they don't work for me. They don't. We all work for the people of Tonbridge. And we all work together for the people of Tonbridge. Yes, I'm the MP. Yes, I'm the one who has to take the final decision or whatever it happens to be. But the reality is we're all in it together. And by the way, I hope, in fact, I'm pretty sure they would agree with that because, if I win the election, we all have jobs. If I lose the election, none of us have jobs. So it really is a team effort in that sense, and we all get it. So that hiring good people and trusting them, don't micromanage, don't, I mean, I can genuinely tell you that the people in my Tonbridge team know a lot of things about a lot of things that I either don't know or know a lot less well than they do because they manage them day to day. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is it's when you take decisions. That's something that's changed for me. So, I mean, I don't know what they teach you at Cranwell, other than drinking gin and propping up the bar, but the
You've been talking to the wrong people, Tom.
is that right?
Yeah.
At Sandhurst, one of the lines they use is a 60% decision now is better than an 80% decision tomorrow. And of course, the point that they're trying to teach is that you're never going to have 100% information, and you're making decisions in order to shape events, not just to be shaped by them. So you've always got to be deciding. One of the decisions maybe do nothing, but it is a decision, right? And you're constantly trying to make decisions in order to shape events, in order to get to a place where you can have outcomes. One of the things that has changed for me on that is true. I sit on some advisory boards at the moment for businesses. It's true for it's often true in the military, not always, but it's often true in the military. It's often true in business. The problem with politics is that the variables are so great that it is almost impossible to shape events to that degree. So yes, you've got to shape things a bit, but the reality is what you're trying to do is you're trying to create optionality so that when things happen, should things happen, you are in a position to make sure you get the funding for your hospital project, or you get the tax cut that you want, or you get the promotion you want, right? Whatever it happens to be, you're creating optionality. And a lot of that is, whereas in the military, you're encouraging people to decide early and to shape events. In politics, you're often encouraging people to decide late, and to allow things to run for a bit and then jump at a certain moment. So it's a very different style of decision making and leadership.
Yeah, really interesting. What about traits then? I mean, you mentioned trust, things that for you personally are your kind of, these are my totemic things that I really value for me. And also, what do you look for in other people? What are the leadership traits you think are most valuable?
So, I mean, I think trust is the biggest one. I mean, I'm going to talk about David Richards for a bit actually, because I think he was the most exceptional leader I ever had the good fortune to work for. He was extraordinary at building teams. I mean, genuinely. And now I've worked in lots of different environments in, agencies and departments, and even sat around the cabinet table in the United Kingdom. And I can tell you, I've never met anybody who can build a team or construct an outfit like him. I regularly would sit in his office around a table, and he's a very clever guy, right? But he wouldn't be the on paper or the sort of, he wouldn't have said he was the smartest guy in the room. There'd be three, four, five people who were by some definitions cleverer than him, but he was the only one who everyone would work for. And so he had this amazing ability to get people to work together who either didn't much like each other or didn't think much of each other or did but didn't know how to work together. You know what I mean? And he could build teams, and I'm sure he still can, but I mean he built teams, and that was a remarkable skill. And I think that was the biggest thing that I saw his leadership skills demonstrate. I mean, it's, having now worked at different levels and in different ways with 6 prime ministers, and I include Keir Starmer, who I work with a bit. One of the things that really strikes me is building teams is really hard. And if you can't do it, if you can't set a clear direction and build a strong team that works together, it doesn't matter what you think about anything else, frankly. You're just one man whistling in the wind, or one woman whistling in the wind.
No, it is a team game invariably, isn't it? Almost
Life
whatever
is
you
a
do.
team game. I mean, it just is. And that makes, I mean, in all organizations, that makes things difficult. And that's where I think there's 2 aspects of leadership. One is, if you're the leader, lead, do it. Don't think you're not the leader, because it really doesn't help anybody. But secondly, if you aren't the leader, if you are, if you've got a different role in the team, do that one too. Followership matters, if you see what I mean. And you'll know this. I mean, you ended up as one of the most senior airmen in the entire armed forces, and you led operations, and you led in Afghanistan, I know. And sometimes you were the leader, as you were in CAF, and sometimes you were part of a team, as it were, even in the same job. If you see me, you're commanding your bit, but somebody else is commanding the overall bit. And knowing what your bit is and what you're supposed to do, I think is incredibly important. One of the best lessons I got was when I'd just been made MA to General Richards, and this crusty old 3-star, who's probably younger than I am now, but he certainly felt very old when I was a very, very fresh-faced half colonel, came up to me and he said, "Do your job." And I sort of went, "Oh yeah, yeah," as in whatever, doesn't mean anything. And he went, "No, I mean, do your job. Don't do your boss's job. Don't do your subordinate's job. Do your job." And of course he was absolutely right, because if you don't do your job, nobody else will. If you try and do your boss's job, you're not doing your job. If you try and do your subordinate's job, you're not doing your job. And I think the same is true in leadership. If you are the leader, if you're leading the team, do it. If you're also a follower, because you're part of your team sits within another team, do that job too. And good followership, as it were, is just as important as good leadership. It's part of leadership.
100%. And I think, interestingly, very, very few people, pretty much nobody, has no boss.
Right.
Even prime ministers, you could argue the electorate is their boss. If they don't like them, they're going to get rid of them.
Well, and the parliamentary party is their boss. And, in some ways, the various different organizations like the IMF and the UN and, the bond markets and whatever else, we all, but know what your role is within it, is what I mean. And act accordingly, because if you don't, and I don't want to start naming names, but if you think that you're completely independent, odd things start happening. If you think that you can behave in a chaotic manner because it's up to you and you can change your mind at any minute, odd things happen. If you don't set clear direction, odd things happen. You know what I mean? It just doesn't work. And let's be honest, one of the problems of the government of the United Kingdom of the last 10, 15 years is that it's been very difficult. Very difficult.
Yeah. No, I think that is challenging. We'll probably come back to that in a minute. I think interestingly, on your leaders, if you're the leader, lead. One story that really, sort of from my side, that I thought was really interesting. When I was the Assistant Chief of Defence Staff Ops, when you were MA to David Richards, it was one particular instance actually when he was away somewhere. So Nick Horton was the Vice Chief, was in the chair, but he was also not in this particular session, and it was a hostage crisis that in Cobra, in the emergency committee, that was, the whole timeline was collapsing. So it ended up with Ollie Robbins as a Deputy National Security Advisor, taking me, the then Director of Special Forces, and a few other people round over to into Downing Street and into David Cameron's office to sit down and essentially make decisions about what was going to happen to resolve this. And it was really, really interesting because I think a lot of people are very critical about I mean, not least Cameron himself, but the politicians in general in this sort of space. But I worked a bit with David Cameron over that time, and I have a lot of respect for him, because one of the things on that day was he talked to all of us in the room. He went around everybody asking for, what's our view about what's going on, and he knew that he needed to make a decision. We needed a clear decision. Do we go or do we not go? And he knew that lives were at risk on the back of this decision, both the hostages and potentially the hostage rescuers, and therefore it was a really big deal. But he was absolutely not afraid to just turn around and get into that. And you can argue, and people will probably listen to this and go, well, that's his job. But it's not that straightforward. You do see people prevaricate in some of these really critical decisions. And, and that's not helpful. And, for us, that would have been the worst of all worlds. So, it is such an important point that if you are ultimately in charge, you have to be ready to make decisions. And sometimes the decisions are going to be pretty tough ones.
Well, I mean, I don't want to breach secrets from my own time sitting around the table at the National Security Council, or indeed occasionally chairing subsessions of it. But a lot of people actually don't want to make decisions. And you and I have seen this not just in political life, but actually you see it a lot in business life. You see it a lot of, they want to have the job, not do the job.
Yeah.
They want to be, the air commander. They don't want to do the job. They don't want the responsibility of being the air commander. You know what I mean? And you see this all the way from platoon commanders to 4-star generals, right, all the way to prime ministers. And one of the things that really struck me once is, you'll know Opadana, which is should an unknown aircraft, or in this case it was a ship actually, be approaching the UK and not responding, and it could be a terrorist, and what do? You know, it's all following 9/11. Sorry, I'm explaining for your readers, for your listeners, but following 9/11, do you or don't you shoot down the aircraft? If you think it's going to crash in central London and kill, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people, do you not have a responsibility to shoot it down? And if you do shoot it down, when, who, where, how? And I remember going through, I was one of the junior officers helping with a training session for a cabinet minister who was taken through this process. And you know how it goes, right? The minister walks in and, right, minister, here's the briefing, unknown, in this case it was unknown ship carrying, I think it was carrying sugar or something like that. Anyway, whatever. It's approaching the harbour, it's going at whatever, 25 knots, it's not slowing down, it's not responding, you've got to make a decision. Oh, well, what more do we know? We don't know much. It's just come from this dodgy port over here. Maybe it's got so-and-so on board, we don't know. And it went through, and it ended up with 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Minister of the aircraft inbound, you've got to make a decision, go or no go. And it was pressure. And eventually the minister said, it's up to the pilot. and it was like, the pilot knows, I mean, forgive me, but the pilot knows literally nothing. All the pilot is the delivery mechanism for your decision. Yeah. That's it.
That's a completely unreasonable thing to then turn around and say it was your fault.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally unreasonable. The pilot is currently doing 700 miles an hour inbound from wherever it is, somewhere in the north of England. It was completely absurd. Anyway, the senior officer who was running it just went, "End X," and it was like, we won't be calling you. Right? It's like, if you can't make a decision in an exercise, seriously.
No, very interesting. I don't know whether you've listened to it, actually. The Sky News did a thing.
I did,
about the war game.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Yeah, really, really, I thought it was very... When you can pick holes in it, of course, from all sorts of sides of it, and you can argue about the depth and length and where they went to and everything else. But I think one of the things it does well is highlight some of the challenges that undoubtedly we're going to get to in a minute, talk about, our own country's resilience and capability and so on. But it is precisely those kind of dilemmas and exercising them. I mean, the old military mantra, train hard, fight easy, is absolutely right. And I know one of the things that frustrated me, go back to the Olympics, actually, I can remember all the arguments around the Olympics, that you will have been well versed in this as well, that we wanted, when we started, as we inevitably did, when G4S effectively collapsed their effort and we had to pick up a load more of it, we wanted to train hard and test the system and make sure we'd fully stress tested everything we were doing. And we were getting a load of pushback from Whitehall, the other side of Whitehall, that, oh, no, we don't want the optics of this, we don't want to be looking like there could be some problems here. And we're going, no, we don't want the problems during the games. We want to sort this out now. If we have problems, we can fix it. We can't fix it downstream. extreme.
Yeah.
And it is this kind of, it's a difficult dilemma, I think, some of the times where people go, and I saw it corporately actually when I was working at Deloitte. It was very, very interesting in the crisis world there, where some, not, and I'm not going to generalize here, because some were very, very good at it. Some senior teams, executives, and boards were very good at it. Others were much more reticent about even doing the training, because they saw it as a bit of an overhead. Why do we need to do that? It's just a cost and time overhead. We're not sure we want to bother with that. And B, because they didn't necessarily, even if they did do it, they didn't want to publicize they'd done it, because they thought, well, no, I don't want people knowing that we're doing crisis training. Well, hang on, this is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for most of your people that are going to buy stuff from you or work with you or be suppliers to you, it means you're actually, you're making yourselves more resilient. I do find it's a strange attitude that is quite pervasive.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's something I think that people are getting better at. But funnily enough, I was helping out a company the other day who just asked for some advice, and I know them very well, so did it for free. But but it was like, how do you think about this? And if you don't think about it, what are the implications should something go wrong? And you'll remember in 2012 when the Olympics were on, we were very, very conscious of what might go wrong. And I mean, we had, I don't know how many meetings about them. And I remember them very clearly, because when Her Late Majesty died a few years ago, I'd been appointed security minister like 2 days before or something. One of the first things I did when I walked into the office was ask for an update on London Bridge. Now, this wasn't particularly rocket science. She wasn't looking great, but I asked for it, and it took the department sort of like 4 hours to find it. Not ideal.
No.
But it did mean that when I needed it the next day, I had it, right?
Yeah.
And we then organized 160 state visits in one, and every state visit you organize, you got to remember that you're not just responsible for your own terrorists or protesters or whatever it is. You're responsible for everybody else's. So there is a small group of 5 people who, for one reason or other, particularly hate the king or the president of this country that you've never heard of. They live in Manchester or Leeds or West Wittering or something, and you've never heard of them. And suddenly they come out of the woodwork because their head of state is in town or their head of government is in town. And you're dealing with this 160 times. If you haven't thought about it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that. So we're post the Olympics. I was lucky enough to go to Rio twice, actually, but the first time was a different part of business. But the second time was Olympic handover.
Oh, yeah.
And so I went as part. There was obviously a great big team went out to do the sort of full on handover, which is a traditional thing that happens. And I was part of the security team for that. And part of the conversation we were having early on was, right, you're going to need to think about this. We're not going to tell you how to do it. We're going to tell you what we did and what potentially you need to think about, because it's up to you how you're going to do it. Yeah. And there's
it'll be different in Rio than in London. I mean, you'll have different people, different forces, different whatever.
Absolutely. But one of the interesting things was we said, you really need to focus on the kind of all the stuff you just mentioned, the terrorism aspect, the fact you've got this, huge diversity of countries, vast amount of people. No, we don't really have a terrorism problem. I said, no, you don't get it. It's not about you. It's about everyone else that's there, and the reassurance those countries are going to want that you've actually got this gripped, because if you don't have that covered, then that's going to be a challenge. So yeah, it is definitely an issue. Hey, looping back to you. I always talk about role models. I like to talk about role models. You mentioned David Richards. I'm guessing he's going to sit in that camp. Is there anyone else that you'd be interested in putting in there as a role model?
Look, David Richards is very, very, very strongly a role model, and there's no way around it. I mean, I don't know how many. I presume you did an MA stint at some point.
I didn't actually. I very nearly became the Assistant Private Secretary of the Secretary of State for Defence, but I didn't get through the final interview. Which actually, as Glenn Torpey was Chief of the Air Staff at the time, said to me, "Do you know what? That's probably a good outcome. You know, being in the final three was good. You know, not getting it means you don't have to do the job."
Yeah, right. Actually,
so I think that was probably a fair shout. But no, I obviously benefited from MAs and PSOs, but
yes.
didn't actually do the job.
I mean, I'm not going to ask any of your MAs, but I tell you, when you work with somebody for 4 years, as I did with General Richards, and you literally live with them for 4 years because you're either you're traveling half the month, or they turn up at the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're with them till they finish the after dinner speech at 10 o'clock at night. So you're spending 24/7 with them is, slightly an understatement. I mean, you're with them the whole time. You really get to know them. It's very unusual, I think, to think more of somebody after the 4 years than you do before. I mean, Churchill had that great expression, "No man is a hero to his valet." Certainly very Edwardian, but anyway. But I tell you, I left working for General Richards thinking more of him, and thinking that he was even more impressive than when I arrived, which I think is an unusual feeling. There are others, I've been lucky to work with who I've been deeply, deeply impressed with for various different reasons. There's been some people in politics I think have done remarkable jobs. Very often, actually, it's people who are unknown, who've demonstrated real courage or integrity or whatever it is. There's a lot of people I was lucky enough to work with. There's one person who you'll know, but you'll understand why I'm not going to name them, who was a very senior intelligence officer in Afghanistan in our time, who ran the most extraordinary operations in the most sensitive way and achieved extraordinary results, not just for Britain, but actually, I think, for the Afghan government as it then was as well. And then there are people who I think have demonstrated just, I mean, for me, a great mentor is George Basil Hume, former Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, died many, many years ago, and was a real inspiration to me when I was growing up. I was at a Catholic school, and he was very present and very challenging. And what was really striking is, I mean, we were, whatever it was, 8, 13 or something like that, and he treated the kids like grown-ups and asked challenging questions and expected thoughtful answers.
Yeah, nice. That's good. No, you're right about the kind of people who live in the shadows, who sometimes get very little recognition, who I think do not only shape us as individuals in terms of your own style and approach and as you go through, but also make a huge amount of difference and never really get the recognition for it. So it's,
and they wouldn't want it either.
No, exactly. That's the world they inhabit, and they're entirely happy with that. But it's it's a good list. So if you took yourself all the way back to that, young Tom Catholic school, as you've just said, what advice would you be offering yourself now, knowing everything you know now?
Work harder at school.
Really?
I wasn't a very good student. I think it's a safe way of
but how much difference has it made? It's not like you haven't had a very successful life. I mean,
well, maybe you're right. I mean, look, I wish I spoke languages better. I wish, I'd read more. You know what I mean? I mean, how much of a difference would it have made? I don't know. I think the fundamental advice that I'd give to everybody, actually, those starting out, it's the secret piece of career advice that nobody gives, but I think really, really matters, and I think it applies to leadership as well. Is be kind. I mean, some people say the advice is don't be a dick, but actually it's more than that. It's be kind.
Treat people like you'd like to be treated, as well as the same sort of thing as now, because some people just don't do that. I totally agree.
And it's not sort of, and I don't mean it's the sort of hippie rubbish that you put on a lanyard. I mean, actually be respectful and decent to people, and the expression, you meet the same people going down as you did going up, and all that sort of stuff. And of course it's true. And actually, one of the things, this is another David Richards story. Sorry, this is not supposed to be a David Richards podcast, but it's one of the David Richards stories that I really like. I I found myself bumping into a retired three-star army general who had just seen David Richards, and they'd been at some, I don't know, some cavalry and guards dinner or whatever, and there'd been a bunch of 2, 3, 4 stars around the table. Do you do this in the Air Force as well, where you sort of sit around, drink port, and talk about whatever?
Less now, but the opportunity is there. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. Anyway, and they'd sat round and they were all showing off about what their MAs were up to and their ADCs, and of course, what they were doing is they were living vicariously through the successes of the people that they'd chosen, which I think is it's quite funny. It's also quite charming, right? It's so they were oh well, my MA is now DSF, my MA is now commanding 2 division or whatever. Sorry, there isn't a 2 division, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And David went, well, mine's running for prime minister, and it was it didn't work, but it was very touching to have that sort of be proud of your team. And I've got members of people who work for me in various different roles who will turn up and go, I've been offered this job, or I want to go and do this, and be happy for them. I think that's the other thing. It's because the idea that you're going to occupy somebody from cradle to grave, I mean, is immensely unlikely. I mean, maybe, but it is immensely unlikely. And so I think your role as a leader is to help people get to the next stage and then support them as they move on. And if you do that well, funnily enough, there are organizations like McKinsey that have made a complete business out of it. If you do it well, then you end up having friends in a number of industries, a number of sectors, who you'll be able to learn from in the future, and it's always great when they end up succeeding better than you.
I think that's right, and I think the interesting thing as well is when your people who have worked closely with you before are coming to you downstream, in many instances long downstream, and asking you for advice. That's a pretty good indication you did something right, from their point of view. If they and I know you're not going to do that with all the people, for sure. I know there are plenty of people that have worked for me and around me that would probably never ever want to talk to me again about stuff like that. But there are equally lots that do, and that's very satisfying, very rewarding to be in that position, which is a nice thing to be.
I still talk to David Richard for advice, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, I can well imagine.
He still teases me mercilessly.
Yeah, I can imagine that too. Yeah, tea in the House of Lords, always a good thing. But highs and lows. I always tend to talk about highs and lows. You have got, obviously a really big swing in terms of different things you've done. What's the career high point for you?
I think the career high point was serving, oddly, it was serving in Iraq in 2003. I think that was it was just the most extraordinary experience of my life. Serving alongside some pretty unique individuals from a Royal Marines unit in way beyond our own lines, way into the distance, and just getting to know a side of myself, a side of other people, a side of the United Kingdom that I couldn't have understood from anywhere else. I think that was the career high. I mean, there's sort of career highs like passing Tony's Law, which was a law about protecting children as well. But I mean, the sort of personal one, as it were, for personal growth, that would be serving in 2003. Low points. I mean, there are quite a few. I mean, personally, my lowest point was when, when my son was born, and he was very ill for the first week. I mean, thank God he's fine now, but that was
yeah, tough. It was very hard.
That was pretty low, but career-wise, I mean, as you may have noticed, Bob, I've run for and lost twice the leadership of the Conservative Party, but I wouldn't describe them as low points. They're just, that's life. These things happen. No, I think career low points have been, I think, things like the fall of Afghanistan was a real low point. I mean, I'm sure you felt it too, but my God, that hurt.
Yeah, I think it was very interesting. I've listened to various very senior players talk about this as well over time. I mean, I think it was inevitable. I remember when I was out there, I had endless visitors at Kandahar, and a lot of them were kind of political / media, and those sorts of people who were always, the questions they would often ask would be, how does this end? Where are we doing the right stuff? Where are we getting to? And I would say I think there's two major challenges. I always had a consistent answer for it. I said there's two major challenges in my view. One is I don't think we got the strategic patience, because I think the reality is this is a multi-decade problem, and I just don't see us being in a position where we're there to do that. And even that might not work, because if you look at your average Afghan certainly around Kandahar, they cared about family and tribe. They didn't even care about the local government, never mind government up in Kabul. And they certainly didn't care about the borders that we'd drawn for them all those years before, etc. And the other big problem was corruption, which was, as you know, I mean, it's not
the same problem actually in some ways.
Yeah, and they don't consider it corruption. I mean, that's just the way stuff's done. So it was a huge challenge to see how that was going to work. The thing that I think surprised me the most was not only the way we took the decision, and the wider we, Biden in particular, obviously was instrumental in this, but I think the speed with which the collapse happened was a major surprise. I mean, given the investment that we put in to training up the Afghan forces and all that sort of stuff over time, I think you could have reasonably expected that it wouldn't have happened quite that fast. And yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think to explain to anybody who lost either individually, who came back badly injured and is living with that for the rest of their lives, or indeed lost loved ones of whatever relation to them, or even just friends, that's really tough. Interestingly, on the counter side of that, I was on a session, it's a couple of years ago now, with an army veteran who he'd lost a leg and an arm. So pretty significant injuries as a young man. And we were having this conversation. He said, well, because the sort of gist of it was it worth it? And he said, absolutely, it was worth it. You think about it. We were there for 20 years. The majority of the population would, have been born in that time. Because it's a very young population. So if one woman or one kid has a better opportunity at life as a result of what we did, then it was worth it. And I sort of rocked back in my seat a little bit, because I thought, wow, that's amazing from somebody who took those kind of injuries. That's respect. I mean, yeah. So it was a different perspective for sure. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that was a really tough time.
I mean, it was, and you're right about strategic patience. I mean, I gave a speech about it at the time, and the thing that scared me then and scares me now is you don't seem to understand. We didn't win in Germany and then walk away. We didn't win in Japan and then walk away, or South Korea and North Korea in the 50s. We won, we stayed, and 40 years later, they are democracies, right? You've missed the point. The battle bit, and you will understand this better than anybody. Any military guy will understand this. The battle bit is only the first bit. Mm-hmm. All that we're doing as soldiers, as airmen, as sailors,
you set the conditions.
Exactly right. You're just creating conditions. Yeah. Now, if politicians, if others like me don't take that opportunity, well, you know what? We're going to be back here again in 5 years' time.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, that segues us quite neatly into what I wanted to talk a bit about. I always tend to talk to my guests about their kind of area of expertise. That's a pretty broad topic for you. But I am interested in the geopolitical world. I mean, we've clearly got a mutual, very strong interest and a lot of experience in the kind of defense and security business. I think you've got a lot of views, and you'll have a lot of experience from your ministerial time, from your chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee time, all that sort of stuff. So you see this and you write regularly about it now. I'm just really interested in your perspective on the world in a couple of minutes on where some of these challenges lie, because I think, and I'll bring it back in a minute to the UK angle on that. So we'll hold off on that slightly, but just looking at that kind of wider world stuff, what you're seeing, what you think at the minute.
Well, I mean, funnily enough, actually, your point about strategic patience feeds straight into this, because, I mean, I am massively a believer that the West, in the loosest possible description of that term, because I'd include countries like South Korea and Japan in that, and Australia, obviously, Western-style democracies are in the strongest position that they've ever been in, and yet we refuse to recognize our own strength almost, and I can prove this, by the way. This isn't just some sort of, wet finger in the air. I can absolutely prove it. Just look at where the migrant flows are going, right? People aren't breaking into Beijing, right? There's nobody thinks it's a really good idea to go and seek asylum in Moscow unless you're Edward Snowden, and that's for rather different reasons. The truth is the world is turning faster and more conclusively towards Western democracies. Now, is it turning towards Western democracy? No, it isn't. But it is turning towards Western democracies because everybody likes what the democracy gives them. They may not like the process, but they like the outcome. And this is where we've got huge strength. And just look at the way that Western countries, particularly the United States, but all of them, to varying degrees, are where the poles of innovation are coming from. Now, I know that's not universally true because China is demonstrating an alternative, but it is only China, right? It's not North Korea, it's not Russia, it's not Iran, it's not, the dictatorships of the world. It's only China and only in certain areas, right? So it's a very, very specific form of state capitalism that is profiting. And I think that demonstrates the confidence we should have in our future. But we can only have that confidence if we believe in it ourselves. And at the moment, the feeling I have is that we don't believe in it. We just don't believe that we're worth it. And we attack ourselves in various different ways, whether it's by, correctly saying that the UK has a checkered record of imperial history and slavery and all the rest of it, while forgetting that we also have a proud record of fighting slavery and defending freedoms, and so it's the one-way focus that so much of the West has. I find deeply worrying, because the truth is, in a straight choice between the authoritarian dictatorships and the liberal democracies, I know which side I'm on, right? 100 times a day. And it's not a very difficult choice, and the alternative is terrible. And yet people have forgotten it. They've forgotten the upside. And so they sort of, we've got into this bizarre moral relativism. It's not morally relative to be under Chinese or Russian or US or British governance today. It really isn't. And if you don't believe me, try expressing your views on the Ukraine war in Russia. I mean, good luck, right?
Yeah.
Try pointing out that there are prison camps of extraordinary size and violence in Xinjiang, in Beijing. You won't survive long, right? You really won't. You can say anything you like in the United States. And yes, I know people are being kicked out for visa violations that, maybe wouldn't choose to see, but it isn't the same, right? It really isn't the same. And you just have to see the way in which the Supreme Court goes against the wishes of the presidency, or in our own court goes against the wishes of the government all the time, to see that there is a big and fundamental difference. And so, I'm a real believer that a bit more confidence in who we are and what we offer and why we've seen a Western century I think, is vital. Really vital.
It's really, really interesting. I don't disagree with anything you said. I think so. Bring it back to UK shores for a minute, because I think we've just had a national security strategy. We've got a strategic defence review outcome where there was, in my view, quite a lot of very useful chatter around that when it was coming out, and a bit of a sense, not least on the back of some of these geopolitical events, that we need to be doing more. We need to, it's our first priority. Every prime minister since prime ministers were invented has said that, quite rightly, in terms of shoring up national security for the UK, and it's the first job of government and all those kind of things. My personal view, and I'm a bit biased, I suppose, but my personal view is that was very positive initially at the political level, but the focus has rapidly kind of dissipated, and it's gone back to, stuff that's in the news all the time. Is welfare, it's health, which are important, and education, which is important, and I'm not decrying that at all. But the reality is the bucket is only so big, and we're going to face a really big challenge if we're genuinely going to upgun security. And I do think it's security rather than defense. I think the day of hard power in defense, it's not as necessarily, I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not as important as it was. I think it's still, there's still definitely got its place. But I think defending against some of the really obvious big threats that are there around cyber and so on and so forth is clearly massively important. And I'm not sure we're from a population point of view, I don't think society gets it at the minute. I don't think they feel the threat. They don't feel the real risks from some of this wider geopolitical challenge coming to the UK anytime soon. Probably the closest thing around that is migration. But just interested in your views. What do you think?
So I think you're right, and I think there's two problems with why you're right. If you see what I mean, one reason you're right is because we've been relatively successful. I can tell you, working with the intelligence agencies as the security minister and being responsible for political oversight of the decisions they were taking, was really striking, because to say that you're constantly juggling plates, right? And you're going to drop one, right? In fact, you're going to drop most of them. And you've got to make sure that the ones that fall to the ground are the ones that don't matter. And the ones that you stay in the air are the ones that do. And that's incredibly difficult, because you're dealing with partial information and all the rest of it. But let's be clear, it's now, 20 years since 7/7, and it was an extraordinary and horrific moment in UK public life. But since then, not completely, not 100%, but we have largely kept this country safe in various different ways, under different governments, under different organizations, in different ways. And so, people have quite rightly felt safe and secure to go about their daily lives, to invest, to plan for the future and all the rest of it. And after all, isn't that the job of government, right? I mean, isn't it the job of government to create as stable a platform as possible, so that you and me and anybody else can take the risks that they want to take and not be forced into dealing with risks that they simply can't avoid? That's the job of government, right? And that's what we have military for. That's what we have intelligence agencies for. That's what we have security forces for. And because we've been successful, you're right, people aren't focused on it. If we weren't successful, my God, they'd be focused on it.
Yeah.
They'd be focused on it instantly, because it's the first thing. Would you really be worried about your kid's A-level if you were worried your kid was going to get murdered on the way to school? No, I'd be worried about the fact that my kid might get murdered on the way to school. I'd worry about the A-level later. You know what I mean? And the fact that you're worried about other things is a demonstration of success in our area, not failure. But that said, you are right. The world is a different place. And you'll understand this. It's that classic Basil Littlehart line, that it's the hardest thing about changing the military is not getting the new idea into the military mind, it's getting the old idea out. And it's true of all organizations, right? Because the people who naturally are at the top of any organization grew up in it in some ways. They were the case officers, they were the platoon commanders, they were the airmen, whatever, right? I mean, whatever it was, they were the ones who grew up in it. And it's really hard to find people who've spent 30 years in an organization who go, yeah, this is the organization that made me into who I am, and it must change fundamentally. It's really hard to do that.
Yeah.
But the truth is, that's what we've got to do. And so, why I'm really pleased about the appointment of Rich Knighton as Chief of the Air Staff, Chief of the Defence Staff, for example, is that you've got somebody there who understands what the Air Force is. And the Air Force isn't about flying planes. It's about delivering strategic effect over great distance, right? Now, traditionally, we've done it with aeroplanes, right? Because that's how you did it. And it started with wooden planes and then Spitfires and all the rest of it. But we don't have an Air Force in order to fly planes. We have an Air Force in order to deliver strategic effect. And the tool that we use is the aeroplane, right? And so on. And so having this understanding of what it is that you're actually trying to do is fundamental. The same is true with, the cavalry. I mean, I met a cavalry general the other day who was quite critical, because I'd said, look, these tanks last 15 minutes in Ukraine. Maybe we should be thinking about something else. And he was like, no, Challenger 2 is wonderful, or Challenger 3 is wonderful. You don't understand. I was like, no, you don't understand. The point about cavalry is not the tank. It's speed and shock on the battlefield. That's what it's there for. The way we deliver it is with this, whatever it is, 80 tons of steel. And before that we delivered with a horse. And next,
it's the modern day horse tank moment thing, isn't it? Though now,
yeah, exactly,
because exactly as you say, people are, we've lived. If you look at whether it's Navy, Army, Air Force, doesn't make any difference. It's a quite platform centric world where we're very focused on, that we need these big bits of hardware to go and do this stuff. And I mean, I share your view about Rich Knighton, by the way. I think because not only from that point of view, I also think because in some ways because he's not a pilot. He's had the kind of approach to turn around and go, right, I'm going to surround myself with people to provide me with that kind of expertise, but I've also got a ton of expertise in terms of finance in defense, because he's been steeped in that, equipment in defense. So in terms of going into the top job and running the whole of the armed forces, I agree with you completely. I mean, I'm not, I like him, he's a friend of mine anyway, but I do think
I barely know him, so I'd say this is an outsider, but it is a defining factor for you. You've already mentioned it. You flew Jaguars. Of course, it's a defining factor for you. I mentioned it. I served alongside the Royal Marines. Right? These are defining factors in who we are. But you wouldn't be advocating us to buy more Jaguars today. I mean, it's not. Now that's an extreme example, but you know what I mean. As an Air Force officer, you know what your job is. It's how do you have effect at depth, at a strategic level, on an enemy many miles, many continents away.
I think that the political challenge, though, if I may be so bold, is that we're in a world where people don't want to put taxes up. It doesn't matter what colour of government it is. And this is a hot topic at the moment, obviously, in terms of right now the Chancellor's lost her battle or the Labour government's lost its battle in the welfare space. That's left a big hole in their own plan. How are they going to fill that hole and at the same time do all the things they've said they're going to do without significantly impacting things that people really, really care about? And if you look at the top three for those, have got to be health, welfare, and education, in my view. I think, and none of which nobody wants those impacted. But the reality is, we're heading towards a world where, again, my slightly jaundiced view, if we do nothing about health, in 15, 20 years' time, we'll have emptied the entire GDP into the health system, and it still won't be enough. But so we need to do some fundamental stuff, and it's just so politically toxic. And I don't blame politicians for this, because I think it's just a guaranteed vote loser. You're not going to get much support from anybody saying, well, we're going to cut your health benefits and we're going to cut your welfare and we're going to potentially change your education system, which, by the way, probably needs to change anyway because of AI. But that's another conversation.
We could go on. But look, I mean, I think you raise fair points, Bob. But I think here's my problem, right? There are three ways of paying for things in government, right? You either cut what you're already paying for and you reallocate money, or you raise more money through taxes, or you borrow it, which is effectively raising more money off your children, borrowing off your kids. That's basically what you're doing. Those are the only three ways of doing it, right? You reallocate, you take more, or you borrow off the future. Now, I'm afraid what this government has discovered is that for various different reasons, you can blame them because they didn't sell it properly, or you can blame their MPs because they don't understand the issue or whatever. I'll leave you to do the politics. I'm trying to be neutral here.
No, I'm deliberately trying not to take it into a political space. Because I don't think it is helpful to do that.
No, exactly. And I'm trying not to blame. I'm just trying to observe, if you see what I mean. They've discovered that they can't cut. Okay. They're going to find it very hard to borrow because the markets have already told us. And let's be honest, we're now being taxed at some of the highest levels in 70 years, and we've already seen, I don't know how many, I'm told 16,000 millionaires left the country, and many job openings aren't going up, they're going down. These are not great signs that you can tax more, and these are really difficult things to do. And that's why actually what we need to be thinking about as a government is exactly like Air Chief Marshal Knighton does as Chief of the Defence Staff. It's what is the purpose of healthcare? Well, the purpose of healthcare is to keep people healthy for as long as possible. How do you do that? How do you do it in a way that is more efficient? Now, actually, I think that some of the things that Wes Streeting is doing are interesting. They're continuations of things, unsurprisingly, that were started 5-10 years ago, but of moving care out of expensive hospitals and into the community. People like it. It's more accessible and it's cheaper. So everybody, it's good for everybody. There are other things you've got to look at in business. Look at the way that the government has effectively, over 30 years, controlled pension savings. I mean, your pension and my pension are a bit different because we don't actually have a pension pot. We've got a promise from the government that it will keep paying us, we hope it will, but there isn't, you haven't got a private, well, you might have now got a private pension, but your Air Force pension is just a promise of future revenue. But most private pensions are invested more in bonds than in equities. Well, that means that there's not enough money going into starting up businesses, into hiring people. And you can see this. You can see you look at the rate of growth of the FTSE over recent years. Look at the way in which different elements of business have had to turn to foreign investment, and you will see a starvation of capital in the United Kingdom. It's a real problem. I mean, I wrote about this in the FT the other day, and I got a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's a terrible thing to say because actually you're blaming people for this." I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just observing there isn't capital. And if there isn't capital, you don't get growth, right? Capital money is just blood running around a body, and if the blood freezes, the body suffers. And putting 60% of your savings into bonds is like freezing 60% of the blood, and 40% can't do the work. It just can't do it.
No, brilliant. Hey, look, we could talk for hours on this. Your time, you've been very, very generous with your time. If you've got time, there are two questions I always ask, okay, and I'd love to just get your quick answers. One is what's the most memorable event of your career so far? All of it, whole career span.
I think the first time I got shot at, I think was.
Yeah, that will keep you awake. Yeah.
There's a moment where, you know this. You've been training for it for years and years and years, and you've been thinking about it and all the rest of it, and suddenly it happens, and it's like, oh, that's what it's like.
Yeah. Mine was a bit different in that obviously I was in an airplane, and you suddenly get these sort of black puffy clouds kind of appearing around the aircraft, exactly. And it took me a second or three to realize what actually was happening here, and it said, okay, yeah, all right, fine. This is.
So I saw and heard pings and noises and things moving, and you look at it almost academically, if you see, oh, that's interesting, and it's like, oh, got it, right, okay, they're shooting, right, okay.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. That's quite memorable. You're right. I've never forgotten that. Well, and final one then, Tom. What's the most difficult question you've ever been asked? And you've been asked a ton of questions, so.
I can't think of the specific question, but the hardest ones always seem to come from when you go and speak to a school group, because when you speak to adults, you can be pretty sure which direction questions are going to be coming or going or whatever. But when you speak to school groups, you get everything from what's your favorite football team to sort of just the most random things. So I think it's always speaking to kids that you get the hardest questions.
Yeah, actually, really interesting on that. It was Steve Hillier, former Chief of Air Staff, was talking to a session I was on a while ago, and he said that he was really struck by, he was talking to a school group, I think when he was actually chief, and one of these kids had asked him, what do you do to manage your stress? And he took a double take on it, and he thought, when I was your age, I don't think he actually answered it like this, but I think he was just having this thought process. So, when I was your age, I didn't even think about stress, and it is indicative of a kind of world which is slightly different now. So yeah, I can totally see that with school kids. That would be a challenge. Tom, you've been incredibly generous with your time. I'm enormously grateful. It's been a fascinating conversation, as I knew it would be. Delight to catch up with you. Thank you so much.
It's lovely to see you again, Bob, and let's get a beer soon.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Bye.
Bye. I really hope you've enjoyed this interview with Tom Tugendhat. It was an absolute privilege to have him on the show, and what a great guy with lots of great information. He's a chap I've known for a long time, obviously. That comes over, I think, in the interview, but I knew he'd be good, and he absolutely was. So I hope you've learned a bit from what he has to say about him, if nothing else, and that's a good thing too. If you found it useful, please do the normal thing and share it, like it, repost it, do all that kind of stuff, so it broadens the visibility of the show itself and of the interview in particular. If you particularly found it valuable, then please, as I always say, think about giving me some value back for that, and going onto Patreon and becoming either a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show, and buying me a cup of coffee effectively for this on a monthly basis. That would be really, really handy. Because it does take time and effort to do all this, and I would really, really appreciate if you're able to give me something back for that. Either way, though, I love having you listening and or watching, and I'm really grateful for that. So if you just do nothing else other than circulate a bit more widely and make the show more public, then that would be really, really helpful. But thank you very much indeed. Back again with another session very soon. All the very best for now. Bye.